Chapter 696, Coral Portable Charger. The train continued forwards under the scrutiny of many. Countless people focused on the train and waited for it to arrive at Oristano, before dyeing the ground scarlet red and sending lives into the heavens. There were usually not many people at the small station of Oristano. But now, hundreds of Department of Faith Theory members dressed in white robes stood there. Their expressions were dark and gloomy as they waited for the opportunity to kill. The Department of Faith Theory was the largest organization in Europe. But due to the difference in population sizes, the abilities of the middle and lower class members were not as strong as that of the Heavenly Network. But this time, it was as if the entire Department of Faith Theory had gathered here. 2 Class Bs were already waiting, along with countless Class Cs and Class Ds behind them. It was as if Lu Shu and Coral were completely unaware of the danger that lay ahead of them. A man in the train car played the guitar and sang a few songs for the passengers on the train. Coral seemed to be tired and leaned on Lu Shu's shoulder before slowly dozing off. Her platinum hair covered half of Lu Shu's body. Lu Shu looked silently at the storm raging outside. The girl leaning on his shoulder made Lu Shu sigh with great emotion. Fate was such a mysterious thing. Lu Shu closed his eyes and decided to rest as well before facing the heavy rain outside. The train was like a utopia away from the evil world. Lu Shu and Coral achieved momentary peace here. But at this moment, some people arrived at the train car where Lu Shu and Coral were in. People had come in front of and behind the car that Lu Shu and the rest were in. They had a stern expression on their faces. Some had followed them from the moment they boarded the train, while others had chased after the train and jumped on. But their objective was to kill, or try to kill. But before they could get closer, they realized that there were gray threads hovering in front of them. Lu Shu opened his eyes and looked coldly at them. His gaze made everyone feel as if they had fallen into an abyss. Lu Shu's ice-cold expression made them apprehensive. The gray threads were like a curse that followed them closely and hurried them to their deaths. But Lu Shu did not make a move. He just wanted the train car to be more quiet and more clean. The massacre was about to begin. Allowing Coral to sleep well seemed to be more important than killing people. Everyone who rushed in were slowly forced out by the sparrow shade. The entire train was originally a utopia, but now, Lu Shu was only protecting the train car they were in. The other passengers in the train also felt that something was wrong. They saw the murderers rush in, only to slowly retreat. Everyone then saw the sparrow shade floating in the train car. They looked at where the murderers were looking and realized that it was the couple they had been celebrating. Just a few moments before, they were still sharing their happiness. They did not realize that they would have to face so many unpleasant looks. An old lady stood up and slowly walked to Lu Shu. She said in English, "My son is from the cartel. I will call him now. You don't have to worry. No one will be able to harm you in Sardinia." Lu Shu smiled. "Are you not afraid that I am a villain?" The old lady waved her hands. "Impossible. Such a pleasant young lady would not fall in love with a villain." Lu Shu was silent for a while. Then he smiled. "Thank you. But there's no need to involve the cartel in this killing. I feel that the cartel now is good enough. Furthermore, they can't kill me." The murderers, who were outside the train car glaring at Lu Shu, suddenly felt as if they were being suffocated when they heard Lu Shu's words. Not everybody had the confidence and aura Lu Shu had. Lu Shu did not know whether he could be considered a good person, as his hands were stained with the blood of many people. He had killed more people than the number of people present. This train was leading everyone into hell. Coral slowly stirred from her sleep. Suddenly, there was a flash of lightning. Lu Shu suddenly thought of something and said to Coral, "Electrocute me." Coral was speechless. How did she receive such a request when she had just woken up? But needless to say, she was rather excited. Lu Shu suddenly thought that since he had been struck by natural lightning and put his hand into a wall socket, Coral's lightning seemed slightly different. Her strength came from the bloodline of deities. Was this similar to the lightning punishment back then? After all, back then during the fight with Takashima Tairatsu, he knew that Coral's lightning was much stronger than that of ordinary thunder-type metahumans. Lu Shu had over 800 sword prototypes, but only over 300 lightning aura blades. There was still no change in the number of lightning aura blades he had. Lu Shu was getting desperate. "Do you really want me to electrocute you?" Coral looked at the passengers around them and asked in a small voice. "Yes," said Lu Shu with a serious expression on his face. A white thunderbolt appeared on the tip of her finger. She lightly touched Lu Shu's skin with that finger. Ow! Lu Shu's entire body shook. The old lady was confused. The man playing the guitar was confused. The murderers outside the train car were confused. Everyone was dumbfounded. No one knew what exactly had happened. There were so many enemies on the train, yet you played with this kind of thing. Were you crazy? Logically speaking, Lu Shu would not be electrocuted by such a small thunderbolt. In a normal battle, he could easily defend himself using the celestial robes or other items. But now, he was completely vulnerable. The thunderbolt entered his body and was almost drawn away by his sea of qi. The thunderbolt meandered outside the sea of qi, unable to enter. In the end, it slowly vanished. Although this did not succeed, Lu Shu had never seen this happen before. When the thunderbolt was drawn away by the sea of qi, he knew that he had found the correct way. Come. Lu Shu felt the strange looks on them and pulled Coral along into the toilet. Coral, who was behind him, was slightly embarrassed. Why did it feel like something unusual would happen? The murderers looked at them through the sparrow shade, which hovered in midair and did not move. This was too much. Bringing her into the toilet with everyone watching? What a pervert. The toilet was small and cramped. Coral hesitated before saying, "I am willing to do so, but could we go to a more normal place?" Electrocute me with all your strength." Lu Shu interrupted Coral. Coral was speechless. She had never expected a request like this. She did not know what to feel. The train car outside the toilet was silent. Everyone remained quiet and wanted to listen to what was happening inside. They heard Lu Shu saying, "Ow." Then, they saw a flash of electricity from the gap under the door. Chapter 697, Kill the Devil, or Become the Devil. The train on Sardinia was like a Tyrannosaurus Rex that broke through countless rain curtains. The train traveled towards hell in the rain. There was conflict, but yet it was peaceful. A voice suddenly sounded in the earphones of the killers. What is going on now? The murderer hesitated before saying, "The two of them went into the toilet. I can hear them saying yow, ow, sometimes too. This is too unusual." The person on the other side of the line was silent. There was supposed to be mutual harm and killing. How did it suddenly turn out like this? Have you made your move? The person on the other end of the line asked. We can't defeat them. The murderer said. The opponent is definitely a Class B, his attacks are very strange. Where is the train? The train will enter Oristano in 20 minutes and reach the station in around 30 minutes. We are already here. The Department of Faith Theory is here too. When the train enters the station, stay on the train and tell the troops not to move. Be ready to launch a combined attack. In the toilet, Coral asked carefully, will this do? Lu Shu heaved a sigh. Thank you. That's enough. As he spoke, a small aura blade flew out of his sea of qi. White lightning surrounded the aura blade. The over 800 sword prototypes in his sea of qi were surrounded by the lightning. When he encountered the divine punishment, there were only over 300 sword prototypes in his sea of qi. Thus, he could only have 300 lightning aura blades. Seeing the effects of the lightning, Lu Shu estimated that if he had over 10,000 sword prototypes in his sea of qi, likely Xianni, he could convert all of these prototypes into lightning aura blades. Coral did not exhaust much energy in charging Lu Shu. But Lu Shu made her pleasantly surprised. Coral realized that she had misunderstood. So Lu Shu had wanted to borrow her thunderbolt to enhance his aura blades. She looked at the small white lightning aura blade curiously. Did this lightning come from when I electrocuted you? Yup, said Lu Shu as he nodded his head. Coral suddenly said, so the more I electrocute you, the more lightning that will be produced? She suddenly thought that, if she was destined to leave this world, she would be able to give her thunderbolt to Lu Shu. Would this be considered as another way to stay by his side? Coral was about to electrocute Lu Shu again. Lu Shu quickly held her back. That's enough, that's enough. They were about to reach Oristano. It was best to do as much preparation as they could. Lu Shu brought Coral back to their seats. He realized that the atmosphere in the train car was slightly odd. The man with the guitar started to laugh loudly. It must be nice to be young. The old lady started to laugh as well. It was as if they did not take the presence of the murderers to heart. But they did not know that countless people with evil intentions had gathered at the Oristano station. They would arrive at Oristano in 10 minutes. The train headed to hell was filled with joyous laughter. Kakaka. The train slowly pulled into the station. An announcement in Italian sounded throughout the train in a light-hearted tone. Good day, passengers. This is Oristano, the final stop. Please enjoy your trip. Lu Shu looked out of the window. It was like a black forest outside, with dozens of figures silently standing in the rain. He smiled at Coral. Are you ready? Coral smiled and nodded her head. If the world outside this train was the deepest part of hell, they would pulverize this part of hell as well. The murderers made way for the two of them. They had received instructions not to stop them and wait for orders inside the train. But the gray threads of the sparrow shade suddenly started to move and pierce through the hearts of the murderers. To Lu Shu, the aftertaste of the pleasant memories were gone. He was prepared. He would either kill the devil or become the devil in the eyes of others. The blood and dirt on the roads outside the southern city were mixed in the heavy rain. It was very unsightly. Coral's cousin panted and stood in the middle of the road, exhausted. Blood continued to flow from his right arm. The blood gathered at his finger and dripped to the ground, drop by drop. The members of the deities behind him were not having an easy time either. The fight was reaching its end. Everyone was prepared to give up everything and do their best. But Francesco, who was standing opposite him, was struggling as well. His white cloak was broken. There seemed to be no more strength in his left arm. The deities were typically kind and gentle, but no one could underestimate their combat power. They had combat instincts due to their Titan bloodline, as well as naturally strong abilities. Francesco laughed coldly. Do you think that by stalling me here, you can save them? The whole of Europe wants to kill the two of them. How long do you think that young man can protect her? The entire Oristano has become a purgatory. They have walked right into a trap. Coral's cousin shrugged his shoulders. This action did not seem particularly serious, since he was unable to move one of his arms. It was even amusing. Have you ever thought about how many men you will lose? I have seen that young man in the Kochang Island remains before. I have always thought that, not only have you underestimated him, the entire world has done so as well. Move, said Francesco in a cold tone. Coral's cousin seemed slightly helpless. How many times do I have to repeat myself? Suddenly, he gritted his teeth and said, today, I will not allow anyone to pass. He had to take a breath in between words. Francesco looked at his watch. It was an exquisite, limited edition mechanical watch. He laughed. Perhaps I will bring you the worst news you can hear. As he spoke, he fished out his phone and made a call. He called the person in charge of the Department of Faith Theory at Oristano. But no one picked up the phone. Francesco had an unpleasant premonition. Call can't go through? Coral's cousin broke into a smile. I think I may know why. Francesco coldly looked at them. Why? The signal is probably weak in their graves. Ha! 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 Cough cough. Coral's cousin and the members of the deities started to laugh loudly at this cold joke. They laughed until they coughed up a mouthful of blood. Francesco silently stood in the rain and drew his sword. His previous sword had been stolen by Lu Shu, but the Department of Faith Theory never lacked in weapons. He could see that the deities were planning to fight desperately to the death. What is all that nonsense for? Coral's cousin coughed up another mouthful of blood onto the floor. Let's fight and finish this once and for all. Chapter 698, 800 Lightning Aura Blades. Lu Shu led Coral into the rain. It was as if he was holding his partner, hand in hand, to attend a dignified banquet. The red carpet had been rolled out, but it was drenched in blood. Fresh blood dripped off the train door. Behind Lu Shu and Coral lay the dead bodies of more than 10 killers. It was a satanic sight. Maybe even demons would be ashamed of their incapabilities to recreate the scene. A buzz sounded above them. A blinding light shone on them, like a spotlight on a stage. Lu Shu looked up calmly and said, "Seriously? They've even sent a helicopter." As he raised his hand, gray threads traveled upwards against the pouring rain. In an instant, 36 holes punctured the entire helicopter. Its propellers screeched, protesting against its impending demise. However, its final struggle was nothing but futile. The right side of the helicopter was suddenly engulfed in fire, and the giant tilted sideways, plunging under gravity. Such technologies were nothing to Class B practitioners because of their many weaknesses. For all this while, Lu Shu had used his water-type power to carefully shield Coral from the rain. He did not want her image damaged at all. Lu Shu was secretly happy that a loser like him could finally have his day of protecting the goddess of men's dreams. He was full of chivalry now, wasn't he? In front of them, hundreds of members of the Department of Faith Theory drew their cross swords in perfect synchronization. Rain poured on their swords, forming a thin river on the blades. So many of them, said Lu Shu with a sigh. Do you know that something interesting happened when I bumped into 2 Class B killers in Africa? Coral was interested. She tilted her head to look at him and asked, "What is it?" During the fight, their cooperation was rather remarkable. The metal-type metahuman was responsible for attacking, and the strength-type for defending, said Lu Shu. Now that I think about it, I do admire their strategies. Besides, they worked well together. No wonder they had the guts to hunt heavenly kings. While the metal-type could move metals around as he pleased, his partner could make the most of his strength and protect him well. Then? Coral did not seem to get his point. I mean, Lu Shu took a deep breath as said, his face became stern, go and have fun. I will protect you. Coral's protectors used to be the 2 statue knights. But both of them had trouble healing their wounds with the crack on Gungner and the slow recovery of Coral's vitality. They had to replenish their energy with Coral's. Yet, Coral had to prioritize her own survival first. But it was fine now. She had Lu Shu. The 36 threads of sparrow shade returned from the sky. Instead of sending them out again, Lu Shu concentrated them into a spinning wall of swords, protecting Coral in the center. Standing in front of Coral, Lu Shu drew his Cheng-Ing sword from his seal of lands. He looked unshakable. Sometimes Lu Shu did admire those heroes in the TV series. They looked super impressive. But he would not have been willing to be one of them, because he had no wish to be the world's salvation. As a matter of fact, he was simply an annoying guy who sold boiled eggs and stinky tofu. It was his talent to spoil a good mood. It might sound like a joke, but he might be a real demon the next day, because a demon's reputation was always built on other people's lives and skeletons. People in the train did not alight. They seemed unaffected by the killing. Everyone looked out of the window eagerly, and an old lady shouted her support for Lu Shu. "She's such a good girl. Protect her well." Lu Shu turned and waved at his friends on the train. For some reason, Coral's heart was warmed by this scene. "Truth be told, Lu Shu, you are a wish I made," Coral said softly. Lu Shu was confused. What do you mean?" "Last year, I tossed a coin into the wishing well and said, 'God, please give me a hero.' Then, you appeared," Coral said with a smile. Lu Shu blushed. "It's my first time to hear things like this. How should I respond?" Pretending to be upset, Coral grumbled, "Fool." Lu Shu grinned. He had no interest in being a hero for the world, but why not be her hero? Honestly speaking, it brought him a great sense of achievement to be a hero. In the next instant, a sudden downpour filled the world. Hidden in it was something terrifying. Upon closer inspection, what was thought to be a flash of lightning had actually not come from the sky at all. There was a storm of sword rain, together with Coral's lightning. Like a monstrous harvester, the 800 beams of aura blades reaped all the lives under the curtain of rain. Those people were like a patch of wheat being cropped. In the next instant, howling sounded across the entire battlefield. A drop of sword rain fell from the sky and hit a member of the Department of Faith Theory. But it did not stop like any other rainwater. Instead, it penetrated his shoulder, crushing his bones and flesh. What if it had fallen on his head? Despite the huge number of their soldiers, practitioners below Class D were not even equipped with spirit chi armor to protect them against this downpour of swords. People collapsed to the floor one by one. Mixed with rainwater, their blood streamed over to the train tracks. There was a flurry of footsteps in the rain. Led by 2 Class Bs, a group of 10 people from the Department of Faith Theory charged towards Lu Shu. The latter did not budge at all, holding his Chang'ing's sword, defending Coral. Answering to his will, his body braced well for the enemies. Every inch of his muscle was hard as steel. Coral released her lightning, which traveled across the sky and lit the rain-drenched world. Then, like a spear, the lightning struck towards the earth, ready to tear everything apart. But with every release of lightning, Coral could almost hear the cracking sound of Gungnir in her body. She had decided not to use her Gungnir, not because of her fear of death, but for her treasuring the time with Lu Shu. However, she seemed to have underestimated Lu Shu too. Coral always thought that this young man in her impression was already strong enough, but it was only at that moment that she realized that he was in fact way more powerful than she had ever imagined. Chapter 699, Disappeared from the World. Blades and Violence. These were how the cultivation world was supposed to be like. On the other hand, love, hatred, emotions and feelings were nothing but pathetic condiments to flavor the taste of blood. Lu Shu had long since been familiarized with Li Xianyi's 13-letter mnemonic rhyme. But the art of swordplay was ever-changing. Lu Shu had been wanting to escape the restriction of the rhyme following Hai Gongzi's teaching, but he had never gotten the chance to practice what he had learned in actual combat. When the Department of Faith Theory launched their attack, there were still hundreds of them alive. Like a small boat in a heavy sea, Lu Shu's life was almost hanging on a thread. There came the heavy footsteps again. Lu Shu was way too familiar with that sound, which was produced by Francesco's clandestine technique used to retrain and manipulate Lu Shu's heart, blood vessels, and even his 36,000 pores. A blade thrust in from the side. Lu Shu lowered his waist and lifted his sword, splitting the aggressor's cross-sword into halves. The Chang'ing sword was invisible. Hence, no one knew how the man died. Lu Shu's move was crisp and sharp. It was as though he was breaking a chopstick. Clean and easy. The department's cross swords had always been the supreme standard weapon in Europe. but it was broken into halves by the invisible blade in Lu Shu's hands effortlessly. "Attack in groups," the commander shouted calmly in the night's rain. Lu Shu could feel the restraint over his body tightening. Now he was like a prey in the face of hundreds of hunters. Someone mocked him coldly from the back of the team, "We want Coral. Not you. We won't hurt you if you step out of our way. There have been so many people who have died for beauties. Why do you wish to join the line? Screw you." Lu Shu lifted his Cheng-Ying sword slowly. Instantly blasts of energy erupted from him. It was the sword energy. This move of his was unexpected. His goal was clear, he wanted to kill. But when everyone was too caught up with the sword energy, corpse dog and concealed arrow flew out of Lu Shu's body secretly. They skimmed across the puddles on the floor, thrusting towards the speaker's legs like a wave-breaking motor boat. Before the man could react, his legs had been cleanly chopped off. "Kill them." The Class B expert was embarrassed and furious. Who would have expected that this man would chop off his legs in front of so many people in the blink of an eye? Trapped in the crowd, corpse dog and concealed arrow were unable to return to Lu Shu in time. Suddenly the silver glow intensified around Lu Shu. Under the increased pressure, Lu Shu found it hard to even lift his hand. The cross swords slashed across the air. Light flickered on their blades. The passengers in the train started to get nervous, but they saw the young man remained standing, despite his apparent exhaustion and his injuries. At this critical moment, a flash of lightning, sharp as a scalpel, accurately hit the silver glow between Lu Shu and the Department of Faith Theory. The glow had been destroyed. Lu Shu was very familiar with the lightning. It was the Gungner. Only the Gungner could be so decisive and powerful. At that instant, Lu Shu was relieved that he had broken free. But in the Department of Faith Theory, everyone's expression changed, as though the failure of their technique had resulted in them suffering from their spell backfiring. However, only Lu Shu seemed to have realized the thick cracks on Gungner. It was also at that second when Lu Shu finally understood why Coral was in an unfit state. During the fight with Takashima Tairatsu, Lu Shu knew that Gungner had cracked. But he always thought it would heal after a few days of rest and nourishment, like his corpse dog. But the reality showed otherwise. The other day, Coral almost fainted due to fatigue. It must be because of the cracks on her Gungner. Suddenly Lu Shu raised his hand. White light was radiating from the white tree mark on his palm. It was his first time to sense the presence of the white tree. But before he could figure out what was happening, Coral had collapsed onto the ground, unconscious. Instantly Lu Shu created a dry environment around Coral to shield her from rainwater. In his eyes, Coral was a beautiful existence, which should not be tainted by rain. Standing in the rain, blood oozed out from Lu Shu's arm and leg wounds, which then healed themselves rapidly. In accordance to Lu Shu's will, splashes of water danced on the ground. He whispered quietly, "It's time." The storm dispersed just as quickly as it formed. When the sky cleared, water on the surface was vaporized quickly. It was almost summer. The temperature rose fast once the rain was over. But the air was not fresh. In front of the Oristano train station, corpses and pools of dried blood sprawled on the ground. The entire train station was blood red, except for a small patch of clean space beside the railway, as though it was guarded by a deity. Countless organizations were alerted to the grand battle at the Oristano station. The whole troop of the Department of Faith Theory was wiped out with no survivors. What was even more shocking was that it was only 2 people who had killed them all. The drastic difference between their numbers was appalling. The reputation of the Department of Faith Theory would have been obliterated if not for the bishop. Coral's and Lu Shu's death was almost thought to be certain. Unexpectedly, though, just like how Coral's cousin put it, the entire world had underestimated that young man. But how could an ordinary Class B be so frighteningly powerful? When he grew up, there might be another terrifying existence in the heavenly network, the second Duke of Xian Tingwan. What was more, this man was so much younger than Duke of Excienting. Driven by fear, some people tried to kill the boy in Sardinia before he could ascend further. But others remained uncertain over whether to take that murderous move. Nevertheless, the two of them had disappeared that night. They were nowhere to be found, as if their existence had been erased from the world. Some people tried to ask the railway passengers for clues. But all of the supposed witnesses claimed that they were resting in the cabins, and had paid no attention to the fighting outside. How was that possible? How could you rest well with more than 10 corpses in the cabin? Apparently they had no intention to leak the secret. But why had all of you decided to help the couple? They were strangers to you. Chapter 700, Coral Can Speak Chinese. Someone wanted to buy information for a large sum of money, but they were met with a torrent of abuse from the old lady. Someone wanted to threaten them, but the old lady was unyielding. In short, she was fearless. To be honest, Patrick from the Black Hand was a pain to deal with. He had announced that he would chase after Coral, but now Coral had run away with someone else. This was very embarrassing. Thus, he wanted to find Lu Shu and Coral. He wanted to tell Coral that long-distance relationships would not last long. That person from the Heavenly Network would definitely not stay in Europe. Compared to that person, he would be geographically closer to her. Furthermore, as long as Coral agreed, he would move to Sweden. When his subordinates in the Black Hand heard their boss repeating himself again and again, they could even repeat what he had said word for word. This overthrew the beliefs of underground organizations, so, if they took the girl away, would all this be over? Patrick even said, "What do you know? I can't defeat Coral either." He had even wanted to properly explain to Coral that since then, he had never hit on other females. Even when he ate chicken, he would not touch female chickens. All the organizations, no matter whether they had already reached Sardinia, or were just observing the situation, all wanted to know where the two of them had gone. But this was not their home ground. Most of the people who had come were experts, who had brought dozens of people along with them. The Department of Faith Theory had even made preparations in advance, thus they were able to assemble so many people. They were definitely not in a favorable situation. Logically, if they wanted to obtain information, they would go find the local thugs. No matter whether they bought the information or traded items for it, they would definitely be able to obtain something. But the local thugs in Sardinia were the cartel. This group of metahumans even performed tricks. What kind of information did you expect them to have? But as they were about to take the civilians away and extort information by torture, the leader of the cartel suddenly appeared and released the civilians. Everyone finally realized that the old lady in the train was the mother of the cartel's leader. She had taken this train with her close friends to watch her son organize a music festival in the north. The large organizations were rendered speechless by the cartel. What kind of organization was this? Was everyone in Sardinia crazy? No wonder this old lady was so strong-willed. But the large organizations did not expect that the cartel had never established an information network. No one was officially in charge of information in the entirety of Sardinia. But all the civilians were their informers. Typical organizations would never think of this, as they were of a higher class than ordinary civilians. They completely ignored the civilians. But on Sardinia, things were different. The metahumans in the cartel saw themselves as ordinary people. They were friends with the rest of the civilians. Thus, the civilians were willing to talk to the cartel about any signs of disturbance or trouble. Overnight, all the civilians on the island knew the reason why the couple was being hunted down. The large organizations had their eye on the part of the world tree that Coral possessed, which was her Gungnir. This form of information dissemination was very odd. The information seemed to have come from an official source, as none of the locals doubted its authenticity. If it was said by the officials, then it must be true. The word started to spread until everyone on the island knew about this. The civilians on the island seemed to be bound by hatred for a common enemy. The shops in the southern cities, where the Department of Faith Theory and the Black Hand were, started to put up their shutters. The civilians on Sardinia did not make a huge fuss. They either watched a performance at the circus or on the streets. They did not operate their businesses. Some organizations suddenly had nothing to eat. Everyone was dumbfounded. When the organizations went to other cities and asked the locals whether they had seen a couple pass by, the civilians almost spat in their faces. But they could not simply kill civilians. If they did so, they would not just cause trouble on the island. Li Xianyi might even bring a few people from the Golden Foundation to observe them. Lu Shu donned a black hat and pushed the wheelchair, where Coral was sitting on. Her smile was like a flower in full bloom. The two of them strolled through the streets of Oristano. That night, Lu Shu carried Coral on her back and left. This was like a turn of fate. Back at the collection of God's fortress, Coral had carried Lu Shu on her back too. The members of the Department of Faith Theory in Oristano were down to their final few men. Coral's condition continued to deteriorate. Lu Shu wanted to let Coral rest here for 2 days before heading north. All of the organizations thought that he had brought Coral away. They did not think that they would still be taking a stroll here. Even if they knew, it would be very difficult for them to find them, as overnight, all the residents of Sardinia were protecting Lu Shu and Coral. Everyone admired Lu Shu's actions. When countless of organizations were trying to covet Coral, he single-handedly brought Coral out of the danger zone. Many mothers wanted to break this couple up and introduce their own daughters to Lu Shu. Lu Shu, there's ice cream there. Coral raised her hand and pointed at a shop. Her face was full of happiness and warmth, as if she was not worried about her own condition. Lu Shu pushed her towards the shop. He asked, "What flavor do you want?" Coral said 2 words, but Lu Shu could not understand either of the words. He was very smart, but he did not know all the words in the world. There were definitely words that he had never heard before. Coral repeated herself. Vanilla and durian. Lu Shu was dumbfounded, as this time, Coral spoke in Chinese. Although her pronunciation was slightly off, but there was no doubt that it was Chinese. Coral blushed slightly. I started learning Chinese a long time ago. I even had a Chinese teacher. But I have never learned how to make Chinese dishes. The dishes that my teacher made were horrible. Lu Shu suddenly realized that all along, Coral had been preparing to go to China for him. As for why she wanted to go to China, Lu Shu felt that it would be silly for him to ask. At this moment, the two of them were still not lovers. No one had taken down the pieces of paper stuck on the window. It was like a game of tacit understanding. But it also seemed as if they had their own personal worries. So, Lu Shu, you can speak to me in Chinese in the future. You can be my Chinese teacher. Back then in the Kochang Island remains, you agreed to do so, but you never actually did it. Just so you know, I'm gifted in languages, said Coral with a smile. Lu Shu nodded his head and smiled. He turned and said to the shopkeeper, 1 ice cream, please. Thank you. A girl was willing to learn a language for you, and was willing to learn how to cook Chinese dishes for you. Lu Shu silently looked at Coral, who was sitting on the wheelchair. He felt warm on the inside.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on a show. Try to look to the heavens.